Hello, today is Friday, April 24th, I believe. So we are going to continue our discussion on arthropods today, focusing specifically on the crayfish. Again, just a couple housekeeping things. Make sure that you are studying your vocabulary terms for Module 5 on the Quizlet Classroom, and that you are taking that test section when you feel prepared to do so. So that I can put that grade into your ClassReach. And so we're going to dive into, it's going to be a 2-video section on the crayfish before we tackle perhaps a virtual dissection of this crayfish. Okay, so this is the image from your book that you see behind me, outlining some of the key features of the crayfish, which is similar to a lobster, or a crab. It's much smaller, but they are abundant, especially in the South, and crayfish are a popular meal for people in the South. They have big boils with crayfish. Additionally, some people call them crawfish. It's more of just a preference and a regional thing, but same creature that we're talking about here. Okay, and so the crayfish comes from phylum Arthropoda, but from class Crustacea. So you've heard people say lobsters and crayfish and stuff are crustaceans. That's because they belong to class Crustacea. So most crustacea live in freshwater or marine environments. Crayfish specifically live in freshwater environments. So that's one of the big differences between them and a lobster. They look very similar to the lobster, but the lobster would be the marine equivalent of the crayfish. Crayfish can be found actually in virtually every river shoreline, and like we talked about in the previous video, they are one of the arthropods that has this unique segmentation in that they have a cephalothorax. Okay, and the cephalothorax is covered in a single plate called the carapace. Excuse me. And so they have this cephalothorax with the carapace and an abdominal region that's separated into 6 individual segments, each with a protective plate of their own exoskeleton. Okay, and there are also 6 sets of appendages, each that have a unique function. So if you go back to the previous slide and look at that photo again, you can see those appendages. Right, and so these are the appendages that we are talking about. They first have a set of walking legs, and this is used for locomotion on land or at the bottom of a lake or a river where they reside. They also have a pair of swimmerets, so this aids them in swimming and reproduction. Either they transfer sperm or carry eggs and developing offspring on them if they are a female. They also have what's called the uropods and the telson, and these form flipper-shaped tails for swimming. So that's the 3rd type of appendage. They have the chelipeds, which are like claws and used for defense and grabbing of prey. You guys have seen those before. They have antennules, which are small antennae that aid in balance, taste, and touch. So again, we said in the previous video, antennae are a distinguishing characteristic of arthropods, and it's used for sensory organs, and in this case it's for balance, taste, and touch. The antennules here. And then the antennae are the longer ones. So when you look at the head, you'll see the shorter ones and the longer ones. These are the longer ones, are more sensitive and provide a strong sense of taste and touch. Okay, and so this is the internal diagram and the major systems of a crayfish. Today we are going to be talking about the respiratory and circulatory, and then in the next video we will talk about the nervous, digestive, and reproductive systems. So as we go through these, be sure to check back and reference this picture so you can kind of get a sense of like which parts of the organs we're talking about and the different systems we're talking about. So starting with the respiratory system, the crayfish obtains oxygen from water through 2 sets of gills, much like a fish does. And this oxygen gas is dissolved in the water itself. And so oxygen cannot diffuse through the hard exoskeleton. So the oxygen in the water has to get transferred into the bloodstream of the crayfish via those gills. Because that exoskeleton is too hard and too thick to allow for diffusion of the nutrients in the water and the gases. So it has to go in through the gills and enter into the bloodstream. much as the same way with many organisms, carbon dioxide in the blood has to get released back into the gills and out into the water. So just as we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, they need to get the oxygen from the water in through their gills, and then they need to get their waste product of carbon dioxide out through their gills. Both sets of gills that a crayfish have reside in what's called the gill chambers. These are slightly posterior to the head on each side of the crayfish. It's a small opening there's a small opening on the ventral side that allows water to flow inside. And there has to be a continuous circulation of water through these gills so that there is a continuous circulation of oxygen and carbon dioxide waste. So these are super important. Along the lines of the respiratory system, the swimmerets, as well as tiny appendages near the mouth called the maxillae, allow for the continuous flow of water that needs to get into the gills. So these swimmerets and tiny appendages are very, very important for that continuous flow of water. It also helps the crayfish handle its food. As you can imagine, there is food floating in the water that is being taken in. And we'll get to the digestive system in the next video. They store water in their gill chamber to allow brief excursions out of water. So you may have seen a crawfish that does crawl out of the water temporarily before going back in, and that's because they've got a storage form for the water. And they can move from one body of water to another, so from a river to a lake, etc. And they'll seek out their food or prey on the shoreline as they do so. Okay, and an important note is that oxygen in this case does not come from H2O. It must be in the form of oxygen gas, or O2, dissolved directly in the water. And it's the plants and the phytoplankton that complete photosynthesis in the water that contribute to this source of oxygen for arthropods. This whole situation of the crayfish having this type of respiratory system is similar to how humans can only hold their breaths underwater for so long. We take in oxygen and continue to respirate until the oxygen is used up. And so that's the same deal with the crayfish here. It can only store so much water, so it's only able to be out of the water for a shortened period of time, much like we are only able to be in the water for a shortened period of time. Okay, so this picture is actually just showing you those gills, and you can see here these legs, some of these appendages that we were talking about. It's eye. This is the gill chamber here with the different set of gills that allow for this. All right, now talking about the circulatory system, as we said, all arthropods have an open circulatory system, and since a crayfish is from class Crustacea of phylum Arthropoda, it too has an open circulatory system, and this allows for that direct contact between the tissues and the blood. It also has a heart on the dorsal part of the body. So again, that's the upper or back portion of the body facing, if you were to look down at this crayfish. And it rests in a cavity that's called the pericardial sinus, and that is labeled on that image, that colored image from your text if you look back. Blood here collects in the cavity and then enters in the heart one of three openings on the heart's surface. So it can pick any one of these these openings on the heart surface, and each has a valve that closes when the heart is ready to pump. And once absorbed, the blood is pumped through the blood vessel that is open at the other end. And so this is their version of their circulatory system, quite different from the human circulatory system. The vessels there then dump blood right into the body cavities and bathe every cell. And this is really important because all those cells need to be supplied with oxygen and carry waste product like carbon dioxide away. Gravity will cause this blood to fall into what's called the sternal sinus of a crayfish. And here, there is more blood vessels which carry blood back to the pericardial sinus. On the way back, okay, it's going to pass through those gills and dump waste, which will get expelled out, and pick up a fresh supply of oxygen. And this will continue to happen in a cyclical fashion and keep rehappening and rehappening. Along the way, blood will also pass through what's called the green gland, which helps to clean for impurities. And so this is an important thing because we want to clean out anything that could be harmful to the crayfish before it's part of the circulatory system and then drenching all those cells. You wouldn't want all the cells and tissues of the crayfish's body to have impurities and things that are harmful to it. So this passage through the green gland is very, very important. Okay, and as I said, cycle will repeat. All right, and for our last slide here for the crayfish circulatory system, sometimes when defending itself, the crayfish can be injured. And so is blood going to flow right out of the crayfish? Because we said it's basically internally bleeding because it's an open circulatory system. So how do you control that blood flow if, a leg or an appendage breaks off of the crayfish? Well, most of the crustaceans have what's called a double membrane in each appendage. So this is going to prevent them from bleeding out in that situation. And essentially this membrane is going to seal the resulting hole. Let's say one of the swimmer rats breaks off, right? It's going to seal the resulting hole, keeping the blood in the body and preventing that mass of blood loss. The crayfish is then capable of regeneration and can regenerate the broken appendage. So the crayfish is actually quite intelligent that it knows that it's capable of regrowing or regenerating an appendage. So if it is caught by a prey on an appendage, it will actually willingly snap its own appendage off to escape, knowing that it can regenerate and that that's its best rate for survival. So very intelligent little creature and pretty cool that it can regenerate. Okay, I have no more slides for you today on the crayfish, but we will check back in on Monday, I believe, for the next, the remaining section of the crayfish and the other systems. So be sure to check out if there's any video resources posted below, and I will see you for your next video.